Shalom, brothers and sisters. This is your brother Martin, and this video is a follow-up to my last video on the leaven of Babylon. It was apparent from the comments and a couple things Abba told me that I needed to make a follow-up to that to make a few things clearer. We talked about the loaf, we talked about the leaven, we talked about who the leaven were, we talked about what the loaf was. And one thing I failed to mention is that after the loaf is risen, which we aligned with this period called the fullness of the Gentiles, what do you do with the lump of risen dough? Well, you bake it in the fire. So there were comments that said, well, the leaven represents sin. And I myself in the tables had said the leaven represents corruption, but in this case, the corruption makes the loaf better. But that doesn't mean you allow the corruption to continue. Just like he wiped out the corruption with the flood, he's going to wipe out the corruption with the fire. So when you bake the loaf in the fire, what does it do? It kills the yeast that would continue to make the loaf rise. And now you have the bread after the transformation that the leaven has given it with all of the risen air pockets in it. And now you kill off that corruption so that you just have the bread left. And that is kind of the fundamental thing, because we're approaching a time like that. Abba has had many of my study group in Ezekiel in the last few weeks. And he gave us something else in Ezekiel, which relates to all of the stuff in the last video with the leaven of Babylon, and that's Ezekiel 39, which starts off, "And you, son of man, prophesy against Gog, and you shall say, Thus said Master Yahuwah, See, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal." Now, if you recall, I had a video that talked about what this Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal is, and it relates to this part of the world, which I did in that video, in the Moshian Mountains, right? And I'll link to that video above, so you can go and take a look at that if you want. But the people he is referring to are the descendants of this group here. And they're a specific group, and you can go and do all kinds of research on it. But he says to them, Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, "And turn around and lead you on and bring you up from the uttermost parts of the north and bring you against the mountains of Israel. And I shall smite the body of your left hand and make the arrows fall from your right. On the face of the field you shall fall, for I have spoken, declares Master Yahuwah." And so this is what he says to Gog. Now, people talk about Gog, they talk about Magog. Everybody guesses at what Gog and Magog is. I sort of talked about it in a previous video. Gog is a principality that is the protector of the city of London, which is the 1 square mile in the center of London, and thus, by extension, the UK. And let's talk about biblical Hebrew, because bad translations, you see me going back to the Hebrew all the time to talk about, okay, people have picked out a translation and the translation is incorrect, and here's what it says when you go back to the Hebrew. Same thing here. Let's talk about biblical Hebrew and grammatic structure. So if I have a name of a person like Yahushua here, and I put a lamed in front of it because Hebrew reads from right to left, lamed Yahushua, I am saying for, because this is a preposition when it's attached to a word, for Yahushua. Likewise, if I said lamed Gog, which would be Gimel Wav Gimel, I would have for Gog. So what happens if I put a different preposition in front of it? Well, if I put mem and then I say Gimel Wav Gimel, I get from Gog, because mem is from as a preposition as opposed to lamed, which is for as a preposition. But the incorrect translation, well, it's not an incorrect translation. It does say Magog, but it means from Gog. So if you think, who are the Goyim, or the nations, who came from Gog, the UK, those will be all of the nations of the Commonwealth, including, well, North America. So if we go to Ezekiel 39 again and use that interpretation for Magog, those that came from the UK, knowing that it means North America, the Master Yahuwah says, "And I shall send fire upon Magog and those who live undisturbed in the coastlands, and they shall know that I am Yahuwah. And I shall make my set-apart name known in the midst of my people Yisrael, and not let my set-apart name be profaned any more. And the Gentiles, the Goyim, the nations, shall know that I am Yahuwah, the set-apart one in Israel. See, it shall come and it shall be done, declares the Master Yahuwah. This is the day of which I have spoken." And Abba pointed out a confirmation of what I said in that last video about the leaven of Babylon later in Ezekiel. Down here he says, "And I shall set my esteem among the Gentiles," right? The Goyim, the nations. "And all the Gentiles shall see my judgment which I have executed in my hand which I have laid on them. And the house of Yisrael, the lost sheep, shall know that I am Yahuwah their Elohim from that day onward. And the Gentiles shall know that the house of Israel," right, the lost sheep, "went into exile for their crookedness," which was idol worship, "because they have trespassed against me, so that I hid my face from them," the Ezekiel 4 curse, which was 2,730 years, "and I gave them into the hand of their adversaries, and they all fell by the sword. According to their uncleanness and according to their transgressions, I have dealt with them and hidden my face from them for 2,730 years. Therefore, thus says the Master Yahuwah, now I am going to bring back the captives of Jacob, and I shall have compassion on all the house of Israel, the lost sheep, integrated into the leaven of the loaf, the whole loaf, and shall be jealous for my set-apart name," which has been hidden in the Bible, right? Deleted from it. "And they shall have borne their shame and all their trespass they committed against me, when they dwell safely in their own land with none to make them afraid." He is going to protect us. "And they shall know that I am Yahuwah their Elohim, who sent them into exile among the Gentiles, and then gathered them back into their own land and left none of them behind. And no longer do I hide my face from them, because the 2,730-year curse has expired. For I shall have poured out my spirit on the house of Israel," right? The lost sheep and those descended from the lost sheep. The whole vat of water with the blue dye in it, declares the Master Yahuwah. Fantastic news for all the remnant. So, when I tell you that the loaf is about to be baked in fire, and Abba tells us that Magog, he shall send fire upon it, and specifically calls us out, those who live undisturbed in the coastlines, well, there you have it. Now, for those of you in the remnant, obviously, everybody with an understanding of these things and who has been seeking after him and is part of those who are to be delivered from Babylon, this is fantastic news. So rejoice, because it's around the corner. And everybody's going to ask me in the comments, when? And all I'm going to say is soon, soon, soon. Shalom all. I'll see you in the next video.